I'm a bit of a fan of our chief exec as well, but I'm a bit biased, and let's face it. So as has been introduced, my name is Pete Mercer, and I'm head of public sector membership programs at Stonewall. So that is to say that I manage a team of about 11 relationship managers who advise a range of public and third sector organisations on D&I issues, specifically relating to sexual orientation and gender identity. But prior to this particular role, I also have experience in managing some of Stonewall's private sector relationships as well, notably in manufacturing. So before I begin, I want to say that I'm really excited and really thrilled to be here, because Stonewall has begun to increase its partnerships with research, engineering, innovation, technology organisations, companies, institutes, and we're beginning to also think about how we work with our higher education partners as well, in particular looking at STEM departments, thinking about some of the challenges that curriculum design presents to LGBT inclusion, or perhaps the other way on. But I really stress that the keyword there is begun. So I think our work in the STEM sphere has certainly been lacking, but it's something that we're really excited to delve into more so than we have done in the past. Because what we know about LGBT people in STEM is that they're tremendously underrepresented in STEM, and where they do exist, actually, they're often not very visible. And that's the key thing, because with sexual orientation and gender identity, LGBT identities are largely hidden protected characteristics. Now, Ruth was talking about women in STEM earlier, and she was talking about kind of gender equality as a kind of surrogate or proxy for diversity and inclusion. And I think in many respects, I think there's merit in doing so. But I also think that there's a difference. And this isn't to say that any protected characteristic is more important, or the challenges that face them is increased in any way. But I think there is a difference between visible and invisible protected characteristics. So whilst I absolutely agree that the argument has been won, as Ruth put it, in a general sense around the benefits of diversity and inclusion to businesses, including STEM, my argument would be that actually LGBT inclusion, that is to say sexual orientation and gender identity diversity, is often not enveloped into that public narrative. And it actually hasn't been for a long time. So it's only been in very, very recent years that the UN, for example, has acknowledged that LGBT rights are human rights. And even then, that is an entirely contested assertion for people to make. So what we sort of see in our experience, limited as though it may be, with STEM organisations, is that sometimes LGBT identities are treated like a taboo or anomaly. At best, they're often treated as purely irrelevant. So people's personal lives, particularly their sexual orientation, whatever they might do in their personal lives, is seen as something strictly personal and not relevant to work and not relevant to the discipline at hand. So I just wanted to say that before I begin, because whilst I thought that Ruth was absolutely fantastic and I took so much away from what she said, I think when you look at LGBT inclusion, I do have to challenge the notion that we have made that business case and that business case is accepted. But you may well disagree, and it would be interesting to hear whether you do. So just to introduce you to Stonewall as an organisation, I'm going to rattle through this really quickly, but we are a charity that was established about 30 years ago. But we're bigger than that. We see ourselves as a family and as a civil rights movement, actually. A lot of us know us for our legal work that we've done. We've lobbied the government to change laws pertaining to sexual orientation and gender identity. A lot of those changes have been quite recent, so it was only 14, 15 years ago that I, for example, could have been fired for being gay and had no legal grounds to challenge that decision whatsoever. So we are talking about kind of quite a new domain. But we also know that changing the laws isn't going to change all of our problems. So we also know that we have to work with institutions that can be very, very powerful in structurally changing some of the barriers for LGBT people, whether that's in the workplace, whether that's in schools, whether that's in sports clubs, whether that's in religious communities. We also believe that institutions aren't just faceless organisations. They're comprised of individuals. So you never achieve change unless individuals step up to the plate and put their head above the parapet to actually change things. So we believe that LGBT people in particular perhaps need to be given the confidence to challenge some of the things that they see and change their surroundings, but also non-LGBT people certainly have a role to play in that as well, and we call non-LGBT people in this context allies. Finally, we believe that sexual orientation and gender identity diversity will never be won whilst there are homophobic, biphobic and transphobic views going around, and they currently are around still in plenty. So we believe in changing everybody's hearts and minds, so we won't rest until homophobia, biphobia and transphobia is a thing of the past. Perhaps a bit too aspirational, but it's good to aim high, isn't it? In terms of our work so far, I'm not going to read through these, but these are all of the things in the last sort of 30 years, well actually a lot of them in the last 15 years, that have kind of been achieved in legislation, not by Stonewall alone, but as part of a rich LGBT campaigning community. Our big priority right now is a review of the Gender Recognition Act. So at the moment it's very difficult for people to transition, and the very binary way in which this is done creates all kinds of problems in bureaucracies for organisations. So if anybody's interested in that in particular, do talk to me afterwards. So I've talked about the law though, but these manifestations show that there is so much more work to do. So one of our kind of key campaigns is Some People Are Gay, Get Over It. And we've also got Some People Are Bi, Some People Are Trans, Get Over It. And we launched that about 10 years ago. And since then, we've seen a huge amount of backlash actually in the public domain. So in the top left-hand corner, there's organisations that have produced T-shirts like Gay Feelings Can Change, Get Over It, alluding to conversion therapy, which is still practice that happens. So there are still clinics that claim to prove that they can change somebody's or cure somebody's sexual orientation. We've got Some People Are Gay, Get Over It, Not Gay, Ex-Gay, Post-Gay and Proud, an advert that was actually put on TfL buses, again alluding to conversion therapy. Most People Are Straight, Get Over It. Thanks for that, I'll log that away. Some People Are Gay, Kill Them, on the more extreme kind of vigilante end, in the form of graffiti, and perhaps a more millennial response in Some People Are Gay, Get Over It, lol, gays. So all of this serves to demonstrate that our work is clearly not done, and we know that homophobic, biphobic and transphobic attitudes are still predominant in some parts of British life. So what about workplaces then? Well, I've already talked about needing legal change, and I've already talked about societal culture being a factor, but we also believe that companies themselves can generate change as well. So the ways in which you engage with your employees, and specifically your LGBT employees, are not necessarily entirely bound by these two factors, legal and societal culture. That is to say, if you're operating in Russia just because, for example, there are rules around sexual orientation, that doesn't mean that you can't, as a company, protect your LGBT staff. There's nothing precluding you protecting your staff, even if the legal framework doesn't really serve LGBT people. And the same with societal culture. Even though the wider world might not be that accepting, especially in certain countries, that's not to say that you can't stand up as a bastion for LGBT rights and protect your employees. So in Stonewall, we believe that workplaces and institutions more broadly are both a reflection of society, but also a mechanism for achieving social change at the very same time. As I said before, whilst Ruth said that the argument has generally been kind of won around D&I and the business benefits, we don't necessarily think that's always the case, because we see constant challenges to that in workplace settings. So I just want to really quickly run through what we would categorise as the main business cases for LGBT inclusion. First of all, compliance. So sexual orientation and gender reassignment, as clumsy terminology as gender reassignment is, are protected characteristics under the Equality Act 2010. And we have seen instances of tribunals and big payouts where there have been LGBT discrimination cases. And there's been a number of high-profile case law where, for example, bed and breakfasts who, on religious grounds, haven't allowed same-sex couples to stay there, and people making cakes, caterers who haven't made cakes for somebody's wedding because they're a same-sex wedding. We've seen these kind of challenges play out, and they've lost. So anybody that's scared about doing LGBT work should know that the law is on your side. But then we also believe that there is a lot to be said about business performance as well. So this is D&I general, but one of our key partners, EY, did a piece of research to show organisations that invest in diversity and inclusion report benefits in staff performance, that you can see up here. More specifically, though, we believe, as I said before, one of the key things about LGBT identities is lack of visibility, distinctly invisibility. So, we would posit that there are significant benefits to you and your workplace for people being out in their work. And when I say this, that isn't to say that every single last LGBT person needs to or should be out. That is an individual choice that people are more than entitled to take. And sometimes it's one based on a risk assessment, so it's not always safe for people to reveal that about themselves. However, we think overall there are benefits to people being out. We believe that LGBT people who aren't preoccupied about what kind of lies they might have to spin about what they did at the weekend in order to avoid talking about their same-sex partner are more likely to have increased energy, better performance, and better relationships, better connectivity across the organisation, because those social bonds aren't being limited in any way and they're not having to constantly think about how they're going to sidestep details about their personal life. It affects essentially, one of the things Ruth said was we want people to sort of be themselves and be the best version of themselves. How can people be the best version of themselves if they're not being themselves? So we believe that people being out gives them a sense of authenticity, which we think is vital for workplace productivity. On the flip side, what are the costs that result from not being yourself? So we think that editing yourself creates an exhausting fiction, which leads to your values and your relationships being compromised. And if you ever want to sort of trial this out, if you're not LGBT yourself, perhaps in a break, maybe do this little exercise where you speak to the person next to you and ask the other what you did at the weekend, but don't mention any gendered language. No he, him, husband, wife, no gendered language at all and no names, and see how kind of challenging that can be. We also do some research. Every single year we run a staff survey nationally. In 2016, we got 90,000 responses to this, and this looks at LGBT responses versus non-LGBT responses, so that we can compare that data and how they feel in the workplace. And it measures things like, do you think your organisation is committed to LGBT inclusion? Can you identify LGBT role models in the workplace? If you were subject to bullying and harassment, on the grounds of LGBT identity, would you feel confident reporting it to your employer? We analyse all sorts of things. But we also look at the disparity between those LGBT people who are out of the closet and those who are not out at work. And we found that respondents who were comfortable being completely out at work were 71% more likely to be satisfied with the support they received from their manager compared to those who are not comfortable being out to anyone. They were 67% more likely to be satisfied with their sense of achievement, and they were 65% more likely to be satisfied with their job security. We're fortunate enough to have a lot of partners in Stonewall, which we value deeply, and some of those partners undertake their own research as well, which we massively welcome. So Credit Suisse, just for example, did a study on staff retention, and they found that closeted LGBT employees who feel isolated at work are 73% more likely to than out employees to leave their job within 3 years. So we know that LGBT people who can't be themselves will leave your company, broadly speaking. And finally, there's something about brand reputation as well. So earlier I talked about the fact that LGBT rights are enveloped into the human rights discourse and equality and diversity generally is something that is contested. Having said that, on the flip side, organisations also think, I think quite rightly, that by demonstrating their inclusion of LGBT identities, they're somehow kind of at the pinnacle of diversity inclusion. It's kind of the most difficult thing to do. It's one of the most recent equality strands to the table. And so by branding themselves as LGBT friendly, they're really kind of saying that they are kind of ultra liberal in that kind of sense and ultra accepting and inclusive. Of course, that's not always the case, but that's certainly the perception. So here's just a few examples of ways in which companies and organisations have really publicly demonstrated their commitment to LGBT inclusion. So we've got some corporate examples, but we've also even got GCHQ, so a security service, who I'm not even sure I really meant to sort of celebrate their location. Clearly donning their building and in like rainbow luminescent lights, which was really fantastic to see. Bold, but great. And just to back this up with a bit of stats, so we know that there's something about client and customer loyalty as well. So we know that brand strength is important. Companies that are more diverse and inclusive have greater brand appeal and loyalty with customers who want socially responsible brands. And we know that 71% of LGBT people say they would be more likely to stay loyal to a brand that actively supports LGBT communities, even if there was a cheaper or alternative version. We also know that organisations that are more tapped into LGBT inclusion are better able to anticipate customer need and to access a broader client base as well. So I'm pretty aware that I'm pretty much out of time. I'm aware that I also haven't really talked about many good practice examples, but I hope I can divulge some of those in the panel discussion afterwards. Just quickly about what we do, we currently work with 750 partners across a range of different sectors and industries, which we call Stonewall Diversity Champions. It is different to accreditation, so instead we run a top 100 employers report that is released every January. So it's in a constant state of flux. So you don't just achieve the benchmark and then pack up and go home. We believe that LGBT inclusion needs some ongoing commitment. But as part of that, we also recognise that different institutions and organisations have different challenges, so we provide tailored and realistic support on a bespoke level. And these are some of the things that we offer. We offer our expertise and resources in the form of our guides, but also in the form of the team that I manage to go out and actually advise organisations on their LGBT inclusion credentials. We guide them through strategy and benchmarking. We provide visibility and branding, as well as discounted rates to our development programs, our leadership programs, and our conferences. Just a quick note about our Workplace Equality Index, which if it was an accreditation, this would be it, but as I said before, it's a top 100 league. It's an evidence-based benchmarking tool to assess your achievements on LGBT equality in the workplace. It informs your strategy and action plan to make sustainable progress. It's measured and benchmarked across key areas, which I'll show in a second, and identifies gaps for you to work through, provides recommendations, and celebrates your success. Key areas that you may want to ask me when I'm on the panel a little later are these. So these are the areas that we scrutinise when we work with organisations. We look at their policies, we look at the employee life cycle, right from recruitment through to exit. We look at LGBT network groups and their visibility and activity. We look at the role of non-LGBT people and LGBT people who want to step up as leaders within the organisation. We look at senior management specifically to see what the senior tiers of an organisation is saying on these matters. Look at your monitoring data, which is by and large rubbish for sexual orientation and gender identity, but it could be very meaningful if we get that data. We look at supply chains as well, recognising that it doesn't just stop at your organisation. We look at your community engagement, and we also look at your customer and service user engagement too. Finally, branding is ultimately important. So organisations that do lots of work, we get to celebrate in the top 100 listings every January. Here's a few examples of organisations that have celebrated their achievements to great success, ranging from a bank to MI5 to a fire service. And finally, there's a couple of other platforms that we manage. So starting out careers guides for those who are either graduating from university, college or school, or who are thinking about a career break. So that lists all of the organisations that we work with, so that any prospective employee can see whether an organisation is at least notionally committed to LGBT inclusion. And we also have an LGBT advertisement board for anybody who wants to specifically target LGBT job seekers. It's a list of some of our partners. As you'll see, a real kind of diversity, but broadly really lacking in STEM, although there are a few exceptions. And I'll wrap it there.